Welcome to Life by Design for Chiropractors, episode 95.
Welcome to Life by Design, the podcast for chiropractors. Here's your host, Dr. Jamie Richards.
Welcome to Life by Design for Chiropractors. I'm your host, Dr. Jamie Richards. On today's episode, we bring on Dr. Cratio Jug, and we talk about a massive barrier to an ultra ROI. Essentially, what's that character trait that ultra successful people have that when applied to all the different areas of your practice can lead to not just to a great return, but I'm talking an ultra return, massive increases in growth, accelerated growth, both in visits, profitability, impact, retention. This character trait you'll find among the best of the best, and you're going to want to know what that is. If you'd love to come on Life by Design for Chiropractors and share a challenge, a goal, something that you're trying to accomplish in your practice, we'd love to bring you on. Love to help you out and record that and share that with our listeners. I think it's a great way for people to learn. So just send me a message, jamie@lifebydesign.com. Tell me a bit about your practice and what you're trying to accomplish, and we'll see if we can't make that happen. Enjoy today's episode of Life by Design for Chiropractors. Cratio, welcome to Life by Design for Chiropractors.
As always, super happy to be here.
Yeah, take two.
Nobody will know.
Well, they will now.
Of course.
Guys, welcome to Life by Design for Chiropractors. As you know, I'm your host, Dr. Jamie Richards, and here I am with Cratio Jug. Always an interesting conversation. We usually spend a good 30 or 40 minutes in the pre-show discussing both the topic and other topics. And as we've said, it'd be interesting to record the pre-shows. Some of that probably couldn't be shared with the chiropractic public, but it would be interesting to be a fly on the wall, that's for sure. So we'll see. Maybe one of these days a snippet will make it out somewhere. But for today, we're talking about a massive barrier to profitability. And I just think that, we both had a really unique experience when it comes to this problem and overcome it to, a moderate to large degree. And it's been a big part, I would say, of our success and success in people that we work with within the profession. So I thought it was worth a conversation today. And I think you're going to get a lot out of it. And that's this idea of risk tolerance. You might be thinking, are we talking about jurisprudence today? Are we talking about, things we learned back in school and legalities, things we can say and do? And that's not really the type of risk tolerance I'm talking about. I'm talking more in terms of, taking action on, the components that you need to do, or maybe you don't know, but that you need to do in order to be successful. So we're going to go through a handful of them and get really specific about, what the areas are that having a higher risk tolerance would lead to a very significant increase in your profitability. So Cratio, I think a great place to start is, why don't you share your experience? I think it's a valuable one for people because I'm positive there's people listening who are feeling exactly the way you felt in the past about this. Share your experience and where you were at 5 or 10 years ago and what that struggle looked like.
The struggle is real. It'll be more interesting to get your input on this because I went through and I don't necessarily, because it wasn't something that I was focused on improving, right? Like when you're focused on improving something, you track your progress. But I grew up very conservative in everything, right? Like my parents were just grateful to be here. So everything was, we should be thankful for this. And by their nature, and again, I'm not blaming them for any of this. I'm just trying to give you a little bit of backstory. I grew up conservative in the sense that I didn't want to push the envelope. I was just happy with what I had. And then when you get into business, this mindset doesn't really work, right? Like if you're in the business of playing defense, when you've taken out loans and you need to grow, and now you're being conservative and hanging on to every dollar, that is the exact opposite mindset of what it actually takes to be successful in business when offense, speed, adaptability win. Right? Like those are the things when you look at every person in business that is very successful and that you want to be like, and this is absolutely true in chiropractic across the board. Those are 3 things that the top people will always have. So, oh my God, I think if we're ever going to do this again, I think the best person to bring on the show would be Rochelle. So you can get my wife to give you all the details. But yeah, it was to the point where we would make some revenue, and instead of reinvesting that revenue back into the business, I was like holding on to dear life, and it was painful, man. Like I was just grateful to get anything. And, and as a result, the growth at the beginning was very limited because
Right.
I just, and again, we talk about growth and profitability. My metric is happiness. Like if you're where you are and you're doing what you're doing and you wake up every day and you're happy and you've made it, perfect. Take everything that we talk about with a grain of salt. But if you're looking to grow and you're unhappy, all right, well, then we got some stuff to talk about.
Well, and I think this topic of risk tolerance applies to areas beyond financial profitability, right? We can really apply this to just the ROI on your life in that sense. I think there's something to be said about risk tolerance in relationships, right? Risk tolerance in your fitness, risk tolerance with health. What are you willing to take a chance on to move away from whatever your current status quo is? I was thinking of one of my joint clients that we have, and some of the struggles, and this is a very common struggle, so this is not to point them out, but when things are difficult, you're making a transition in practice, let's say, which is a common thing we see. People have got going in the wrong direction. We've got to start to slow that train down and bring it to neutral and go the other way, whether it be changing pricing or people's type of frequencies. And you hit a point where all of a sudden some of the old income isn't coming in, even though you're reorienting, and you start to freak out. And the question was, well, what do I do? And obviously, the answer is, you get to work, you follow the plan. But I get it. When there's no money there, what do you do? And the answer is you do what a business would do. You take a loan, you get a line of credit, you get investors, right? I mean, anybody who's watched the Shark Tank, the majority of those companies are not self-funded. They're funded by other people, and they're creating cash flow. And so, many chiropractors find it very difficult to go in that direction, and they're afraid of debt. And I'm not suggesting you go out and get a loan unless you need to specifically grow and you're trying to go penny by penny by penny. If you look at the point of having that cash flow or the point of getting a line of credit, I'll use the Life by Design Center, for example. I used every dollar I had from the sale of my previous practice, sale of shares in our old gym, but that money disappeared. And so I had to go get a loan, and I went through that loan, and the practice was open, the business was running, but then we didn't have the cash flow to support it. So what did I do? I went and got another loan for $250,000. And so, reaching the point for the second time in my career of being $500,000, $400,000 in debt, and then now fully recouping that 2 times, that's, I look at it and it never would have happened, Horatio. Like none of this would have occurred if I didn't take that chance and calculate a chance and have at least enough tolerance to go ahead and pull the trigger. And I think that's what we're talking about today.
Yeah. So, I mean, just a note on that, because you've said there's a lot of gold in there, but I think the biggest crime against all chiropractors is the lack of education around running a solid business. Mm-hmm. And, just so we're clear, if we look back at the stock market and we start 100 years ago, so we go back to 1919, there's only one company left in 100 years that's trading on the New York Stock Exchange, and that's General Electric. Every other company has come and gone. So it's the nature of business. You're running a business, right? Like I think a lot of times, and this was definitely true for me, there was this feeling of failure. If I don't have, or if I didn't achieve certain things or certain numbers. But the reality of it is businesses fail all the time, and they're not failures. That's just the nature of the game.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. If your tolerance isn't developing, then you're just not going to be successful in business, at least not on any level of at least financial success. And I've already said that I still think you'd have a difficult time being successful in other areas. I mean, asking somebody to marry you is a risk.
But we even in the pre-show when we were talking about you need certain levels of risk in order to get good results with practice members, to be a good doctor. There needs to be a certain risk tolerance there.
Sure. I mean, to use an extreme example, you have to have a certain tolerance to leave your house, to get in the car, to walk across the road. And most people generally have that level of risk, but there's some specific areas in practice, Horatio, that we'll talk about that improving your risk tolerance. And just as a side note, we will talk about how to improve it, but just think of it as a muscle. And, it's something that needs to be used and stretched, and then it recovers. And then you make that, you take that action step again, or you elicit a certain level of risk and you see that you didn't die and you survived and you learn some lessons and you move forward. And so it does take time to grow and build. But if you do that, you'll start to see it really pay off, especially in these specific areas. The one we talked about, Horatio, that probably opens up the whole conversation is this idea of marketing, advertising. We were specifically talking about the importance of ad spend. We were talking about Google AdWords. So when it comes to, say, an ad spend, what is it you're seeing with clients, and what is it that you actually are doing and would advise somebody to do?
Yeah, so you can start small. Again, the reasonable budget, I think, is 10% or even 5% if you're really cautious of what you're bringing in every month, right? So if you're billing, $20,000 a month, it's not unreasonable to spend $1,000 to $2,000 a month on some type of marketing. Mm-hmm. And what you do is you take a small portion of that, something that you can get results relatively quickly, and you see what works, and then you do more of that, right? Like the number one thing when you're creating this type of stuff is to figure out what the big levers are. We talked about levers too, which I thought was great. And then once that you know that they're working for you, you just apply more money. And if you don't apply more money, you don't gain more leverage, right? Like, I think the confusion, and again, I'm going back to my own experience. I think that what happens with this type of thing, okay, someone's going to listen to this podcast and they become super motivated. All right, I need to become, more risk tolerant. And then they're going to go spend, $20,000, on something that might not even work. Like, that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about, just blindly throwing money at something when you have no idea of how it's working. But, step number one when it comes to marketing is make sure that it's working, and then you can start to increase the budget, right? Like, eventually it becomes a slot machine. Like, if I know what my numbers are, which is another podcast that we just did, and I can multiply those numbers by increasing the volume, I'm just going to get more.
Well, when it comes especially to online, a lot of, we're talking about Google AdWords and even Facebook, a lot of it is outspending your competition. So when you do find something that works and it's time to scale it up, could be direct mail. It could be, you can apply it basically everywhere. But are you able to outspend your competition? And, the risk tolerance is a calculated risk, as you were saying. It's not as if you don't know that there's a good chance that this is going to lead to something that's positive. And again, you can't guarantee the results. That's, obvious. But you can definitely look at the past as a trend, and then you start to scale and scale and scale. And, it gets scary when you start reaching numbers, I think, where, it gets beyond, that 5 or 10% of what your revenues are, even if it's working. And that's really the interesting part, right? Is I think it was Seth Godin years ago talked about, if I can spend $1 and make $2 or even $1.50, then I'm just trying to find as many dollars as I can find.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and again, like all that becomes like, all that's romantic talk. I think, everyone understands those principles, but when it comes time to actually follow through, right? You're fighting against yourself. So this is the biggest foe. Like all this stuff can make perfect sense, and you're hearing it. You're like, I totally get that, but it's not going to work for me. It's the same things that people tell themselves. And that's really like the heart of this issue, right?
Sure. It's the actual psychological side of things, right? This fear that starts to cloud your objective judgment. That really is the solution if we skip ahead, and then we'll kind of reverse engineer this. But, if you want to actually build your risk tolerance, it starts with having an objective assessment. It's to get clarity on whatever the particular area is, to then make a calculated action step and then look for feedback. And again, the challenge is going to be, you're going to see it working. And of course, we need to define working in each situation, because I think we've had this situation, right, where people say, well, this isn't working. And you're like, it's working. It just depends what your definition of working is. And then you start to scale that, and you start to fight against this. And there's lots of ways to do it. You were talking about, I think it was speaking with a financial advisor, and you asked them that difficult question, why would I give you money to go in and invest and pay you a percentage? And what did he say?
Yeah, he said, because I'll do it. He goes, because what's going to happen, he goes, because what's going to happen with you, he goes, is it'll come time to put your money into the market to buy that stock, and the market will be down and you'll need to buy something, and whatever story you'll tell yourself, you won't follow through.
Right.
So it was just a brilliant answer. Like, he admitted that he wasn't doing anything that I couldn't do, but the fact that he could follow through was what. But here's the crazy part. So financial investors make a percentage off a lot of money. Like, it's a big amount of money for one simple step, because they're able to follow through, right? So that follow through that you're scared to do for all this stuff is the leverage that's costing you everything.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yes. And so back to this risk tolerance being such a barrier to profitability, we look at it too, Horatio, beyond, say, marketing and advertising. Another big area is just learning.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know about you. Risk tolerance, by the way, is something that I've developed, I think, and you could comment on this, but I think quite a high level of risk tolerance. Sure. I spend a lot of money on learning. Like, if I see something I think is going to be valuable to me, as you know, I just buy it. And
then you tell me to learn it and apply it.
Whatever it takes.
I don't have time for this. You learn it, you do it, okay?
Right. I'll spend the money, right? And you can show me, or you can do it for me, and I'll pay you to do it. I don't have any problem with that whatsoever. But the point is, I see the value, and it's not the money. The risk doesn't bother me because I see the potential return. And so I think a lot of doctors have this struggle as well, where they don't want to take a seminar. They don't want to do a workshop. They don't want to buy online. They don't want to do a digital course. They don't want to do training or coaching, or they don't want to have somebody helping them because they're afraid of spending $100 or $1,000 without actually thinking of the potential upside to that. They just see that as too much risk.
Yeah, they're going to be down $1,000, but they don't realize, that this is $1,000 towards, reaching that thing that you say that you want.
Well, and it also applies, you go from marketing to learning to, I've seen some chiropractic offices in my day, and it definitely looks like they're retaining whatever dollars they're making and putting it somewhere that is not their office.
Yeah. Home cooking chiropractic.
But they don't see it particularly as a way to improve profitability. But, one of the important concepts to understand is that when you create a premium service, so whether it be through your professionalism, whether it be through your practice objectives, whether it be through your office, the way you look, speak, all of these components that tie in together, they're all important. You can then charge a premium fee. And you might even be delivering the exact same service. And I think this is a really interesting conversation. How do two people who deliver the exact same service, and let's assume the same quality, everything, one charges 30% more than the other? It's simply that they're creating the illusion or their perception of a more premium experience for people. And part of that is, your office, how it looks, how clean it is, how professional, how contemporary it is. And then you can even kind of step that into other parts of the experience. So your staff. Right? Are you paying somebody minimum wage? Because, when it comes to staffing, it drives me crazy to see people out there looking for minimum wage staff.
Yeah. Do you really want a staff member that's a minimum wage worker? Like, there's a certain mindset and mentality that comes along with minimum wage, and this is nothing against minimum wage workers, but for me, I want good staff who act professionally, who show up on time, who just create an excellent experience for the people who I love and I want to take care of.
Well, and the numbers are insane. $1 more, $2 more, $3 more over a 20 to 40 hour work week. I mean, you're talking about hundreds of dollars. You're talking about a couple extra visits in order to have a much, much, much better quality of person and experience that gets created, which just continues to cycle back, where you can actually create a more premium product and a more premium service, and you can raise your fees and you can be more profitable. But where does it start?
This goes so much further than that, right? This goes like for staff. This is, people who are less likely to turn over, people who are more likely to learn. It's just it's crazy how little it actually costs you and how much the quality of everything improves for paying your staff decent money.
Well, and how much you can charge. Right?
I know, and how much more you're going to make.
I don't know if this has come out yet or if I've talked about it in our social media outside of the Elite Doctors group, but just this idea of, practice levers, and, your pricing is your biggest lever. And, the fact that you're not charging premium pricing that's equal to whatever the supply and demand is crazy to me. Now I get it because I've completely been there, and it's been this ongoing and improvement in risk tolerance. I mean, even take, for example, a couple months ago, Horatio, with us, just having switched associates and walking through this new model, I just took all my visits and compressed them into 2 days. And now I've got this crazy, insane practice over 2 days. And at the same time I did that, I increased my fees another 10%. So I increased my fees another 10%, compressed everything, and here we are 6 weeks later, and everything's working out great. We had our challenges, we worked through them. We have to up our game as a team because we've got to make sure that the experience continues to be as good or better, but we're more profitable and we're actually working less than we were before. If I didn't have the tolerance to do that, then I wouldn't have done that, and I'd still be working 3.5 days a week, seeing the same number of people, making less money.
Yep. Yes.
So
I don't know. I don't know what else I can say other than yes.
Well, I think all the answers to this are yes, right? We've made the case that developing your risk tolerance and taking calculated risks and calculated chances and really taking the actionable steps to move you out of the status quo and continue to grow personally and in your practice and profitability wise, there's just, I don't see a reason not to be doing this other than, of course, as you said, you're fighting for, you're fighting the mental space that is holding you back. You're fighting yourself. And so the last couple that I think are worth noting, Horatio, gifting is another one, goes back to the practice experience, right? How much you're giving back. Think about how much you can spend. If you know your lifetime value of a patient, you can start to really calculate what would I spend on retention in my practice. So how much am I going to invest in gifting? How much am I going to invest in, cards that say go out to my practice, or office parties, or other types of events? Most people are focused on investing money into new cases, but they're actually not thinking about investing into retention. They're thinking about creating retention through communication, and that's wonderful, and through agreements and many things we've chatted about. But I also think that you can take some of that cash flow and invest that into retention, even if it's $5 a person. Think about what that would look like over the course of every single month. What would $5 look like as an investment in terms of retaining 5% more or 10% more of those clients? Taking holidays, right? Horatio, how long did it take you to actually start taking a significant number of holidays in your practice, and what was holding you back before?
A long time. I don't actually remember when I took my first quote holiday. And again, what was always holding me back was myself and my own mentality, because I knew all this stuff. I knew that it made sense. But for whatever reason, I couldn't bring myself to execute it. And then even when I started executing it, it was like really small. But it doesn't matter. Those small little things over time add up, and then you become a totally different person.
Well, that leads me to the final piece here, which is the solution. We talked about, taking an objective assessment before you make decisions, calculated risks, so gaining clarity and then taking action. What do you say to somebody, Horatio? I think you just said it, and it, really is becoming more aware of their risk tolerance, that it is a thing to pay attention to, as you noted before, start tracking these things. But, what do you say in the moment where they've actually gone through that process and they're about to, make a decision, but they find themselves being held back? Is there a conversation? Is there something that, you feel like could really just nail them and have them just pull the trigger?
No, there's not one thing. I spent a lot of time thinking about this. I think what really has to happen is for me, it was just the disgust of being where I was, got to the point where, I had to do something, and I just started doing something, and I did something within, at that time, just a little bit out of my comfort zone, right? Like 1 or 2%. I'm not comfortable with doing this, but I know that it's going to help at least a little bit. So I'm going to do it. And then that's how it starts, right? Like you don't get to 315 pounds, front squatting, starting, you don't just show up and do that. You show up and you do the bar, and then you do 45s, and then you do 155, and you get there.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice. And that's what we'll leave you with, guys, is, just become aware. Become aware of all the opportunities in your life, practice, business, and otherwise, where you could be making a different decision that is going to propel you forward, but you're scared to do it. And just start exploring that. Why am I scared? What's the fear? For me, one of the strategies is, I go through and I say, well, what's the worst case scenario here? Right. And am I okay with that? That's really my process that's helped me is, all right, what's the worst case scenario? And I find that reconciling the worst case scenario allows me to basically feel okay with the decision. Right? Let's say nothing works. Let's say it's a total disaster. What's the worst thing that's going to happen? Am I going to go bankrupt? Am I going to lose my family? Am I going to get injured, hurt? Am I going to die? So as long as none of those things are going to happen, and the worst case scenario is something that I'm okay with, then I go ahead and I make the decision and I see what happens. And a lot of the time, the decision works out for the best, and then you grow and you continue to accumulate your tolerance, and over time it just keeps going and going and going. So that's what I'll leave you guys with. We'll put all these notes in the show notes of the podcast, guys. You can find them at lifebydesignforchiropractors.com/podcast. Check out this episode and click listen and check out the show notes. And as always, thank you for listening to Life by Design for Chiropractors, the voice of reason in chiropractic.